Mossad is considered one of the most formidable and efficient secret services in the world, created with the ultimate mission of preventing another Holocaust from ever occurring. You cannot fully grasp the history of Israel, or even the broader history of the world, without uncovering the hidden story of its intelligence services. Mossad is given the license to deceive, to manipulate, and when deemed necessary, to kill. It was Mossad that orchestrated the bombing that eliminated a senior Hezbollah commander, and it was Mossad that carried out the assassination of a prominent Iranian nuclear scientist. Through daring and often spectacular operations, Mossad influences not just the Middle East, but the politics of the entire globe. For more than 50 years, it has been involved in nearly every major event in this volatile region. New to Buried Intel? This is where we bring the buried stories of history back to light. Hit subscribe and be part of the journey into the secrets they never wanted you to know. Feared, powerful, and always controversial. Jerusalem, this holy city revered by three great world religions. For generations of Jews scattered across the world, it was little more than a distant dream, a city longed for in prayer and memory. Since 1967, however, these sacred sites have fallen under Israeli control. In the Six-Day War, Israel once again crushed and humiliated its Arab neighbors. But the victory was not just symbolic, it was territorial. Israel seized East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, the last remnants of land the Palestinians still possessed after Israel's War of Independence. In 1967, Israeli troops also occupied the Golan Heights and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. To Israel, these newly occupied territories became bargaining chips for potential peace talks with the Arab states. Within Mossad, some operatives drafted a concept for the Israeli government, urging that Israel should immediately approach Palestinian leaders, support them, and offer a withdrawal from all occupied lands, first granting them autonomy, and later allowing them a sovereign state of their own. Whether the government ever seriously considered such an idea remains unknown, but the overwhelming sense of triumph blinded most Israelis to the escalating tensions in Gaza and the West Bank. Arabs who had been displaced across Palestine during Israel's War of Independence in 1948 had fled into these areas, turning them into densely packed refugee zones. As a result of the occupation, a conflict that had been simmering for over 2 decades was now pushed to the edge of explosion. Israeli intelligence had no choice but to urgently expand its networks to confront this growing threat. Among the younger Palestinians living in refugee camps, there was a rising willingness to radicalize, something Mossad did not yet fully perceive. One of those young men, who would later become the Palestinian representative in West Germany, was part of this generation. Raised in a Gaza refugee camp, he recalled that the Arab states had always promised, "We will fight for you, we will return you to your homeland." But over time it became clear, they would not act. That realization sparked radicalization. We had to do it ourselves. The camps forced Palestinians into close contact with one another. There was little space, little privacy, but this closeness bred unity. It was in those cramped conditions that the seeds of organized resistance began to grow. Within just a few months of the Six-Day War, over 60 assaults were carried out. Israeli intelligence as a whole came to see this rising Palestinian resistance, not just scattered attacks, but coordinated efforts, as a serious challenge. For the first time, Israel controlled vast Palestinian territories, which gave them both opportunities and risks. They could recruit informants from the West Bank and Gaza, but the same territory also provided militants with easier access to carry out terrorist operations. The danger was becoming constant. One Israeli officer remembered that only 2 weeks after the war ended, Mossad had already intercepted and captured 2 separate groups of militants. That threat, he noted, never went away. It only evolved into what Israel still battles today. Modern-day security barriers are now a permanent attempt to protect Israelis from Palestinian attackers. But back in 1967, the situation was new, raw, and unstable. Mossad had to completely rethink its strategy. A new enemy required an entirely new approach. Mossad's primary mission became clear: identify the masterminds behind the resistance and eliminate them. Yet Israel's decision to meet radicalization with targeted killings only hardened the Palestinians' sense of national identity and purpose. The political party Fatah soon became the beating heart of the resistance movement. At its core, it was secular, leftist, and militant. In its early years, Islam played virtually no role in its ideology. Fatah's stated goal was uncompromising, the total liberation of Palestine, which in practice meant the complete destruction of Israel. At the center of Fatah was Yasser Arafat, once a building contractor. Along with his associates, Arafat had co-founded the movement in 1957. To succeed, however, Fatah needed the support of Arab governments. But those states were still reeling from the humiliation of the Six-Day War. Egypt's President Nasser had long backed the Palestinian cause. After the war, he threw his weight behind creating a unifying body for the Palestinians, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. Since Fatah was the strongest faction, Arafat rose to become the head of the PLO as well, making him the face of Palestinian resistance. For Israel, Arafat now became the ultimate adversary. For Mossad, he became target number one. Arafat turned into the living symbol of the Palestinian struggle. The more Israel tried, and failed, to assassinate him, the more his legend grew, both among his people and even in the eyes of the Israelis themselves. Hunted relentlessly, Arafat often hid in neighboring Arab countries, while simultaneously exporting PLO-led terrorism to the wider world. The globe, at that time, provided fertile ground for such operations: open skies, open borders, and weak international law enforcement. The PLO quickly realized it could act almost anywhere. Meanwhile, thousands of Palestinians had settled in Europe. The PLO built networks at universities and in working-class communities, finding allies among radical left-wing student movements. In Germany, Abdallah al-Franji was then a student at the University of Frankfurt. He remembered how much early support they received. During demonstrations, they organized marches, distributed Palestinian scarves, and spread their slogans. Wherever he gave a speech, he recalled, the crowd responded with sympathy and understanding, but these activities did not go unnoticed. The activism of Palestinian students in Germany soon attracted Mossad's attention. Informants warned case officer Rafi Eitan about the emerging threat. Eitan, who was then head of Mossad's European division, quickly learned that Palestinian groups were recruiting students into Fatah and preparing to form underground cells among the student population, cells intended to carry out terrorist attacks against Jewish targets. Frankfurt became a focal point of Mossad operations. Palestinian leaders had even rented an apartment there as a meeting place. To them, it was nothing more than a friendly space for exiles to gather, but to Mossad, it was a dangerous hub of resistance. Rafi Eitan decided it was time to strike before things could develop further. His proposal was simple: let us kill this movement in its infancy. The Frankfurt apartment was soon bugged by Mossad. There were no guards stationed, no real precautions in place. Yet despite this vulnerability, we did not undertake any military actions there. Instead, what took place were political discussions, serving as the foundation for decision-making. But one authority regarded the group as a serious threat, and so he requested Tel Aviv's approval for an operation. I responded directly: let us deal with these people, whether one by one if you prefer, or all at once. The reply came back swiftly. Meanwhile, the PLO continued to shake the world with dramatic acts of terror, their signature being spectacular skyjackings designed to force global attention onto the Palestinian cause. And their leaders openly declared, "We will not turn away from these actions, regardless of what consequences follow." Hijackings of planes, even when they ended without casualties, provided unforgettable, highly effective images for television audiences across the globe. Mossad worked relentlessly, often feverishly, to gather intelligence about attacks before they were carried out. Yet Israel quickly realized that it could not count on the support of European intelligence services. For years, the Israelis had repeatedly warned European agencies and police forces, "These are terrorists operating on your soil." But those warnings consistently fell on deaf ears. Europe, in many instances, preferred to maintain a posture of so-called neutrality in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so, they often chose inaction, doing nothing to prevent or halt the operations. The Palestinians exploited this hesitation with precision, Within Israel itself, militants could be fought through arrests or, when necessary, targeted killings. But once the battlefield shifted to Europe, Mossad's hands were effectively tied. That dangerous imbalance became clear during the 1972 Olympic Games in Munich, an event that would soon be caught squarely in the crosshairs of Palestinian terrorists. West Germany had hoped to use the Olympics to improve its international image. Police officers remained unarmed, since the Games were meant to be cheerful, modern, and cosmopolitan. But German security experts had long warned, Israeli athletes were prime targets whenever they competed abroad, especially in Munich. Some had even run simulations of potential attacks, predicting assaults on the Olympic Village and on Israeli athletes specifically. Despite this, the organizers clung to the belief that the Games would remain peaceful. Instead, they descended into catastrophe. Mossad received word that an assassination attempt was planned during the Olympics, but the intelligence was vague. They had no precise knowledge of the timing or the location. There was only a general sense that something terrible was imminent. Without clear and accurate information, what could be done? In this case, Mossad was forced to admit their failure. They did not have the actionable intelligence required. And when you lack that clarity, tragedy becomes unavoidable. Munich was exactly that, a tragedy. In the early morning hours, Palestinian gunmen slipped into the Olympic Village. They shot and killed 2 members of Israel's Olympic team. Soon after, Germany's Interior Ministry confirmed that the terrorists were holding at least 13 hostages. Their demands were chilling: the release of more than 200 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel, as well as 2 high-ranking German Red Army faction members. Subsequent investigations revealed that some of these Palestinian attackers had even studied in West Germany, all without raising Mossad's suspicion. The terrorists made it clear, once their deadline expired, the hostages would be executed. Back in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Golda Meir flatly refused the demands. Instead, she dispatched Mossad's director, Zvi Zamir, directly to Munich. She pleaded with him, "Zvika, I beg you, go there. At the very least, we must know what is happening on the ground." Before he departed, the Germans made their position unmistakably clear. Israeli commandos would not be allowed to attempt a rescue. Helpless, Mossad's chief was reduced to the role of an observer, forced to watch as German police assumed control. The officers, inexperienced and poorly prepared, dressed in tracksuits, took up positions. Yet the terrorists inside the Olympic Village could watch every move on live television. The planned German rescue effort collapsed before it even began. The Palestinians then escalated their demands. They wanted safe passage for themselves and the hostages to Cairo. Under German supervision, the group was driven to the airport. What followed was a sight Zamir would never forget. He recalled, "I saw them, hands and feet tied together, the athletes shuffling past me. Next to them walked the Arabs, silent as death." Germany's crisis team appeared to have surrendered to the terrorists' terms. Helicopters transported the group to a nearby military airfield. The German plan was to ambush them there, preventing them from boarding a plane to Egypt. Zamir lay next to one of the snipers and was horrified at what he saw. The German marksmen were equipped with outdated rifles, no telescopic sights, no modern gear. Nothing. It broke his heart. Then the Palestinians tossed a hand grenade into one of the helicopters. The aircraft erupted into flames instantly. All the hostages inside that first helicopter were killed. Moments later, during the ensuing gunfight, 5 of the 8 terrorists were shot dead by German police. But the Israeli hostages inside the second helicopter were also murdered, shot at point-blank range. Not a single athlete survived. Just 27 years after the Holocaust, Jews were once again slaughtered on German soil, and Israel, despite its vigilance, could do nothing but watch. The grief in Israel was overwhelming. The nation mourned deeply for its fallen athletes. Neither the government nor the intelligence services had succeeded in protecting Jewish lives abroad. Weeks later, a Palestinian commando attempted to secure the release of the 3 surviving Munich terrorists. They hijacked a Lufthansa passenger jet. The German government capitulated, freeing the assassins. In the Arab world, the terrorists were welcomed as heroes. For Israel, this was a humiliation, a clear sign that the Jewish state could rely only on itself. Prime Minister Golda Meir now stood under immense pressure. Elections were approaching. The people demanded justice. Meir responded by giving Mossad the green light to wage a relentless campaign against terror. If the Palestinians intended to shift the war to Europe, then Mossad would follow them there, not only to thwart future attacks, but to dismantle the entire network that enabled them. The Munich massacre permanently reshaped Israeli policy. From that point forward, the cabinet authorized Mossad to hunt down and kill Palestinian operatives in Europe, even though such actions openly violated international law. But the decision was firm. If Israel did not act, no one else would. The lesson was clear: strike first or face annihilation. Until Munich, Mossad's primary focus had been intelligence gathering, meticulous reconnaissance. Now a new expertise was demanded. Operations no longer meant just information, they meant targeted assassinations. To carry this out, a specialized unit was formed. They called it Caesarea. Its agents were tasked with hunting down the masterminds and eliminating them. Executions on foreign soil became their mission. For decades to come, Caesarea's men and women would define the public face of Mossad. Though the agency's internal structure remained shrouded in secrecy, 8 central divisions became known to the world. Caesarea was one of them, responsible for covert strikes and operations. Another, Tzomet, managed Mossad's cooperation with allied intelligence services. Mossad gathers intelligence through methods such as wiretapping, close surveillance, and even break-ins. The largest branch of the organization is called Summit, and its responsibility lies in collecting intelligence from human sources. It manages and controls a vast worldwide network of informants, particularly focusing its attention on Palestinians considered terrorists. This phase begins in October 1972. It was, without question, an act of revenge that must be acknowledged, but it was also primarily about preventing further terrorist acts against Israel. And in order to prevent terror, you must take every possible measure within your reach. But these measures must also be carried out with cleverness and discretion, in ways that prevent anyone from directly confronting you with the question, "What exactly are you doing here?" Mossad's assassinations are carried out in complete secrecy, but their results are made visible enough to serve as a chilling warning to potential terrorists. In Western Europe, Mossad commandos operate with relative ease. They can move freely across borders, and if they are ever caught, the consequences are usually limited to prison time. But the most significant and high-value targets find safety and refuge in Arab countries. One such figure was Abdallah al-Franji, a spokesman for Palestinian students in West Germany, rumored to have direct ties with those responsible for the Munich massacre. Eventually, he was arrested by German police. I remember him very clearly, the name, the person. He was one of our designated targets, and in truth, the fact that he landed in jail ended up saving his life, if I may put it that way. Al-Franji and his comrades had sought shelter in Germany, in hopes of avoiding Israeli capture. But soon they no longer felt secure even there. At the same time, German authorities were eager to rid their soil of every single PLO member. Their intelligence service, along with many other forces, likely wanted me gone. They managed to expel me after supposedly finding plans in my office that allegedly outlined bomb attacks on Israeli embassies. They fabricated claims, accusing me of things I had never actually done. Ultimately, I was deported and found sanctuary in Algeria. The idea of returning to Europe seemed far too dangerous. Mossad's pressure was being felt everywhere. From Algeria, Al-Franj was appointed to run the PLO's European office. He shared that office with a close comrade. I recall vividly, my friend, the PLO representative, was holding a thick envelope in his hands. I told him directly, "Please, do not open it." He looked at me and asked, "Are you serious?" Then he went ahead and opened it anyway. The next moment I was hurled nearly 6 meters across the room. My head struck hard. My friend's fingers were blown off both hands, and his body was shredded by fragments. I considered myself fortunate. I escaped with injuries, but nothing fatal, unlike the terrible fate of my comrade. Within the span of a single year, Mossad successfully eliminated 14 Palestinians, both across Europe and in Beirut, where several senior PLO leaders had gone into hiding. For a time, these targeted killings by the Caesarea unit were regarded as a major operational success, but then came the infamous mission in Lillehammer, Norway. a catastrophic blunder still remembered as one of Mossad's greatest failures. In a disastrous case of mistaken identity, Israeli agents killed a Moroccan waiter, believing he was Ali Hassan Salameh, the alleged mastermind behind the Munich massacre. The situation worsened when the agents were captured by Norwegian police. During their trial, Mossad's operational methods were dragged into the light of public scrutiny. Across Europe, communication networks and secret hideouts were compromised. It was nothing short of a disaster for the intelligence service. The campaign of vengeance against the PLO effectively came to a standstill in Lillehammer. By then, Yasser Arafat and Abu Jihad had already decided to cut back on most operations in Europe. In that sense, the assassinations that Mossad had carried out had already produced the desired effect, forcing the PLO to change its strategy. PLO leaders concluded that future attacks should focus on the occupied territories rather than in Western cities. Acts of terrorism in Europe damaged their public image. But not every faction adhered to that directive. Hijackings and hostage-takings in Europe still continued. And so, Mossad once again found itself relentlessly pursuing its enemies. We had no choice but to continue. And continue we did. Some operations were openly reported, while others remained forever in the shadows. In 1979, Mossad finally succeeded in eliminating a top terrorist figure with a car bomb, a man they had hunted for years. This time, it was Ali Hassan Salameh himself, the very target they had missed in Lillehammer. Mossad was active across the globe. One of its operations even altered the political trajectory of Africa. Until that moment, Jews had primarily been viewed as shrewd businessmen and bankers. Now they were also gaining a reputation as formidable soldiers and master spies. Requests for help began pouring in from the farthest corners of the world. "Assist us, you are like supermen," they would say. Since 1969, Mossad had been assisting Christian rebels in southern Sudan. These rebels, who felt oppressed by the central government dominated by Arabs, were fighting to break away. Both Israel and the rebels shared a common enemy in Sudan's president, Jafar al-Numairi. There were around 30,000 Anyanya rebels still entrenched in the bush. Some of them even donned the cap and jacket of an Israeli paratrooper. Among the 3 Mossad operatives dispatched to support them was David Ben Uziel. The doctor, the signal operator, and I embarked on a mission whose purpose was to make life increasingly difficult for the Northern Army. Our mission was to raise and train a battalion of 1,000 men, construct a landing strip, organize medical and communications courses, supply weapons and equipment, and then launch offensive operations. The Mossad operatives had been tasked with forging a rebel army strong enough to stand against the Sudanese government forces. But why, one might ask, would Israel commit itself to such a mission so far away? It was extraordinary. 3 Israelis operating in the untouched jungles of southern Sudan. No divisions of tanks, no squadrons of planes, no heavy armies. Yet for both Egypt and Sudan, it meant Israel's presence was looming close, breathing down their necks along the Nile. Israel feared that Egypt would attempt to retake the Sinai Peninsula, lost in the Six-Day War. The logic was simple. As long as the rebels could keep the Sudanese army tied down in a civil war, Sudan would be unable to join Egypt in any fresh confrontation against Israel. This was no act of charity. Every intelligence service asks the same question. What is in my interest, and how do I achieve it? Israel sought alliances in Africa to weaken its adversaries. At that time, Africa held great importance for Israel. It represented the first real opportunity to break free from the encircling ring of hostile Arab states surrounding it. Mossad missions across Africa were often carried out under assumed foreign identities. It was politics shaped by a simple principle: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This applied not only to Israel's African operations, but also to its covert ties with minority groups in the Middle East. Whether with the Kurds in Iraq or the Christians in Lebanon, the nations of the Middle East and Africa were young, turbulent, and politically unstable. Israel's strategy was to strengthen minority factions, creating allies where none previously existed, within regions otherwise dominated by hostility. These African alliances would, in turn, contribute to Israel's broader struggle against Palestinian terrorism, and soon, Entebbe would become the stage for yet another Palestinian hijacking. An Air France passenger plane, carrying mostly Israeli civilians, is hijacked mid-flight and diverted to Uganda. The operation is quickly claimed by a radical splinter faction of the PLO, directed by Wadi Haddad, already notorious as the architect behind several high-profile hijackings in the past. Uganda's ruler, the unpredictable dictator Idi Amin, welcomes the hijackers and allows them to use his country as a safe haven. What makes this unusual is that Amin had once been an ally of Mossad, which means Israel already possesses extensive knowledge of the airport's layout and infrastructure. A daring rescue mission is soon devised. By chance, the airport in Entebbe had originally been constructed by an Israeli company, so planners in Tel Aviv have access to the original blueprints, allowing them to prepare their operation in meticulous detail. For up-to-date intelligence, Mossad dispatches an agent disguised as a hobby pilot. Borrowing a private aircraft from neighboring Kenya, a state with strong ties to Mossad, he carries out discreet aerial reconnaissance and photographs the airfield. This intelligence proves to be the crucial factor in shaping the rescue plan. Disguised as civilian transport planes, Israeli commandos fly directly to Entebbe under the cover of night, tasked with liberating the hostages. The state of Israel had no other option, one officer later recalled. We had to rescue them by force. The mission could not have succeeded without Israel's covert African networks. In truth, when the so-called periphery doctrine was first envisioned, no one had ever imagined it would one day make an operation like Entebbe possible. Yet it gave Israel the ability to intervene deep in the African interior, far beyond the Arab front line, and ultimately made this rescue achievable. Suddenly, the hostages, more than 100 in number, are returned home safely to Israel, joyously welcomed back by their families. Thanks to the combined efforts of Mossad and the military, Israel remained true to its guiding principle: no negotiations with terrorists. The raid demonstrated with dramatic force that skyjacking would not yield success. The Entebbe mission became a celebrated triumph, enhancing Mossad's reputation worldwide. But this victory also bred an excess of confidence, and in other arenas Israel's intelligence services would soon face painful missteps. In 1970, a dramatic shift occurs in Egypt. A new president takes power, a man with a strong military pedigree and a burning desire to erase the humiliation of the Six-Day War. His name, Anwar al-Sadat. Yet Mossad gravely underestimates him. Sadat openly declares that he intends to reclaim the Sinai Peninsula, seized by Israel in 1967. He even forms a pact with Syria, which itself still smarts from the loss of the Golan Heights. Despite these signals, Israel's leadership dismisses Sadat's threats. They place their faith in Mossad to provide advance warning, particularly since the agency boasts a prized asset inside the Egyptian regime. Ashraf Marwan, codenamed Angel, a senior advisor to Sadat himself, and one of Mossad's most important spies. "He was the best we ever had," recalls one Israeli official. "When I first heard of him, I didn't believe it could be true. But when I saw the material he brought us, I realized, if this was genuine, it was extraordinary." Ashraf Marwan stood at the very heart of Egyptian power. Married to Mona, the daughter of former President Nasser, he had risen to prominence within the ruling elite. This family tie placed him close to both Nasser's legacy and Sadat's administration. But why did Marwan turn spy for Israel? Some speculate that resentment fueled him. Nasser, it is said, believed Marwan married Mona only because of her name, not for her beauty or intelligence, and therefore treated him with disdain. Perhaps Marwan sought revenge for this humiliation. Others suggest he was simply motivated by financial gain. By the autumn of 1973, Israeli military intelligence observed troop movements by both Egypt and Syria along the borders. These were dismissed as routine maneuvers. After all, they reasoned, if a serious attack were planned, surely Ashraf Marwan would have alerted them in advance. This assumption proved disastrous. The Arab forces had deliberately crafted a campaign of deception. Then came a chilling message from Marwan in London. He summoned his handler, declaring that war was imminent. "I interrogated him about every detail," the Israeli officer recalls. "We checked and rechecked the information. Yet I began to suspect, had he been turned? Was he now a double agent?" The Mossad director faced an agonizing choice. Twice before, Marwan had predicted an invasion that never materialized. To raise the alarm once again, only to be proven wrong, would risk his career and damage Mossad's credibility. He understood the stakes. If he informed the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, and the Chief of Staff that war was about to erupt, and nothing happened, Israel would have mobilized its reserves unnecessarily, on Yom Kippur no less, the holiest day of the Jewish year. The backlash would destroy both him and the agency. Yet according to Marwan's warning, the invasion was scheduled exactly for Yom Kippur, a day when Israeli life comes to a complete standstill, when families gather in fasting and prayer, and soldiers are least prepared. "I wrote a telegram of 5 lines," the Mossad chief later said. It stated simply, "War will break out." I left no address, no phone contact. I made myself unreachable. My message was clear. You must decide. Israel's armed forces hesitated. Mobilization did not begin until just 14 hours before the war erupted. It was too late. The price was paid in blood. Although Israel ultimately prevailed in the Yom Kippur War, the initial surprise was devastating. Marwan's warning had been accurate, but acted upon at the last possible moment. For a small nation, the losses were crushing. Even after the war, Ashraf Marwan continued his work for Mossad from his London base. His identity, however, was eventually exposed in 2002, 3 decades later. It was one of the gravest intelligence breaches in Israel's history. The public revelation of such a high-level source sent a chilling message worldwide that Israel could not safeguard its agents' identities. Who then would risk working with Mossad? In 2007, Marwan died under mysterious circumstances, plunging from the balcony of his London apartment. "To our nation, he was invaluable," said one Mossad veteran. "We failed him by not ensuring his protection." But was Marwan truly loyal? Or was he playing a dangerous double game? The question lingers. At his funeral in Egypt, he was honored with full state ceremonies, an odd tribute for a supposed traitor. The man once known as Angel, who may have saved countless Israeli lives, remains shrouded in mystery. Yet one fact is undeniable. The Arabs' near-successful surprise assault during Yom Kippur gravely undermined the image of Israeli intelligence. Mossad and military intelligence had failed at their most fundamental duty, to detect danger before it struck. Public trust eroded. After the war, Israeli leaders like Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin grew skeptical of their own intelligence services. For years, they treated agency reports with suspicion, preferring to form their own assessments rather than rely on Mossad's word. The Yom Kippur War shattered not only Israel's belief in its military invincibility, but also its faith in the very institutions meant to foresee and prevent catastrophe. What follows is a profound transformation in the nation's foreign policy. We often focus our attention on Mossad's Special Operations Branch, but Mossad's influence extends far beyond covert missions. It is also about hidden, discreet, and clandestine diplomacy carried out behind the curtains of official politics. From Israel's earliest years, Mossad carefully built underground channels of communication across the region. These were temporary lifelines, secret routes of dialogue, created because a political ice age prevented open diplomacy. This approach was pioneered by Reuven Shila, the very first director of Mossad. He initiated contacts with opposition groups as well as with senior officials in various Middle Eastern governments. Turkey, Iran, and Ethiopia all agreed to enter covert partnerships with Israel, largely because, like Israel, they too viewed the Arab states as a dangerous common threat. Even certain Arab nations, such as Oman and Morocco, quietly maintained secret ties with Tel Aviv. Mossad's long-nurtured relationship with Morocco's King Hassan II would bear fruit in 1977. These contacts had been cultivated carefully over many years, particularly through the close cooperation of both nations' intelligence services. The pro-Western monarch had no shortage of enemies among the Arab states. In such circumstances, Mossad's intelligence capabilities became extremely valuable. The Israelis even assisted in keeping tabs on Hassan's domestic rivals and opponents. Because of this support, the king willingly granted Israel's request to help create a line of contact with Egypt's leadership. In doing so, Hassan was not only assisting Israel, but also doing a great favor for Egypt, placing himself at the very heart of something monumental. This maneuver simultaneously strengthened his primary goal, securing a favorable relationship with the United States. It was a win-win outcome. Soon after, Israel's Foreign Minister Moshe Dayan traveled secretly to Morocco. There, he suggested that Israel might be willing to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. Only days later, President Sadat of Egypt stunned the world by declaring publicly before his own parliament, "I am ready to go to Jerusalem and talk to the Israelis." It was a turning point, an historic moment. Sadat became the very first Arab head of state to set foot in Israel and deliver a speech before the Knesset. It was nothing short of revolutionary. Until the mid-1970s, Egypt had been Israel's fiercest and most uncompromising enemy. This marked the first time leaders of Israel and an Arab nation sat face-to-face to negotiate a peace treaty. The breakthrough was made possible by Mossad's painstaking secret groundwork, combined with Egypt's desire to free itself from Soviet dominance. For Sadat, this was not only about peace with Israel, it was about securing peace with the United States. He had already expelled the Soviets. Now he sought partnership with America. His plan worked. U.S. President Jimmy Carter stepped in to host the difficult negotiations. At Camp David, Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin signed a historic peace agreement. Some would later joke that the Camp David Accords should have been renamed the Jimmy Carter Conference. Yet, while Carter aspired to broker peace across the entire Middle East, what emerged instead was a bilateral peace between Israel and Egypt, a dramatic and irreversible turning point. Behind the scenes, the political and strategic web that made this possible had been woven by Mossad. The peace deal was constructed largely without direct American involvement, a fact that has long been a quiet source of frustration for intelligence professionals, for in the world of espionage, successes are rarely acknowledged, while failures are dragged into the spotlight. This truth applies to all intelligence services, but is especially pronounced with Mossad. The peace treaty between Israel and Egypt sent shockwaves throughout the Arab world. Sadat was expelled from the Arab League and ultimately assassinated just 3 years later. But Israel continued to depend heavily on Mossad's discreet channels of communication. In Arab and Muslim states, power structures often revolved around the intelligence apparatus. If you could establish a secret line to the head of intelligence, you were essentially in contact with the ruler himself. Israel had much to offer those willing to cooperate: economic leverage, diplomatic access to the West, and highly valuable intelligence. Dictators in particular found such information indispensable. The Shah of Persia had been one of Israel's secret allies since the 1950s. Under the rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran leaned firmly toward the West. It was a wealthy oil state, but one with a severe lack of human rights. Yet that did not stop Mossad. Close cooperation blossomed. The head of Mossad became a frequent guest in Tehran. A strategic partnership was built. Iran supplied Israel with oil, while Israel provided expertise and support in matters of internal security. But despite Iran's oil riches, countless Iranians lived in deep poverty. Social tensions mounted, and the regime unleashed its notorious intelligence service, Savak, to suppress dissent, often with Mossad's training and support. To outsiders, Iran's system of governance seemed harsh, but the Shah insisted that he and his people were united, that their vision of democracy differed from the West's. By 1978, however, mass protests threatened the regime's stability. Mossad grew deeply concerned about losing a critical ally. The greatest danger to the Shah came from religious forces led by the cleric Ruhollah Khomeini. Living in exile, first in Iraq, later outside Paris, Khomeini issued fiery calls urging Iranians to rise. As demonstrations intensified, the Shah turned directly to Mossad. He requested that the Israelis eliminate Khomeini. The Mossad director recalled being put on the spot. He asked, even if the mission succeeded, what would the consequences be? How would the Americans, the French, or the Soviets react? And if the attempt failed, what chaos would follow? Ultimately, Mossad did not act, but the situation spiraled further. A revolution ignited. When one Mossad officer arrived at headquarters, he saw armed revolutionaries outside, Kalashnikovs at the ready, while sandbagged positions inside bristled with machine guns. It was obvious. The regime was on the verge of total collapse. The Shah's feared secret police could no longer hold the line. Mohammad Reza fled the country. Mossad had expected the generals to impose military rule, but the officers proved weak, loyal only to the Shah himself. Many escaped abroad. Those who remained swore loyalty to Khomeini, who dismissed their pledges and executed them. Khomeini triumphantly returned to Iran and established a theocratic regime. One Mossad veteran later admitted he was haunted by his own misjudgment. Looking back at the devastation Iran's Islamic regime unleashed across the Middle East, he confessed that he would have made a different decision if given another chance. Mossad lost one of its most crucial partners and now faced Iran as its most dangerous foe and enemy, whose stated mission was the annihilation of Israel. Yet not everyone saw this as a disaster. Yasser Arafat and the PLO quickly offered their alliance to the new rulers in Tehran. Palestinian nationalists and Iranian Islamists found common cause. Both were sworn enemies of Israel and the United States. Mossad now confronted an entirely new kind of adversary, religiously motivated fanatics who embraced death as willingly as life. Thus began the Islamist era,